Some spells bind your hands for a single night, but the cruelest magic is the kind that lets go and leaves you standing there, free, choosing to stay. The bell is about to ring. We begin now. The great hall had been stripped of its long tables and remade into something that did not belong to daytime. Frost climbed the window panes in fern shapes that no charm had drawn, and the enchanted ceiling had abandoned its usual mimicry of the sky for a deep, starless indigo, as though the castle itself were holding its breath before some verdict. Floating candles hung lower than usual, their flames a strange pale gold, and the light they gave did not warm so much as gild, turning every face in the crowd into a portrait of itself, beautiful and unreadable behind a half-mask. Hermione Granger stood near the base of the staircase and pressed her thumbnail into the pad of her forefinger, once, hard, to remind herself she had chosen to come. She had not, in truth, chosen it. Professor McGonagall had framed the solstice exchange as a gesture, an old, pure-blood custom, older than the war, older than the grudges the war had hardened into stone, and reviving it was meant to say something about mending. We break bread with those we would not have chosen. That was the phrasing on the notice pinned to the common room board. Hermione had read it 4 times and understood each time that attendance was not truly optional for anyone whose name meant something to the papers. Hers meant a great deal now. She wore her silence about that the way she wore the deep blue of her gown, carefully, as armor that must not be seen as armor. The mask covered her from brow to cheekbone, worked in silver filigree that bit faintly cold against her skin whenever she turned her head. Through its eye slits, she watched the room assemble itself into pairs and clusters, and she counted the exits without meaning to. Old habit. The war had left her with a body that mapped rooms before it trusted them. At the center of the hall stood the thing everyone was pretending not to look at. A basin of black glass on a plinth of the same, and floating above it, turning slowly, a sphere of parchment slips folded so tightly they resembled a swarm of pale moths caught mid-flight. This was the lottery. Not a hat, not a hand drawing names. The old magic did not permit choosing. 2 names, sealed, would rise together and ignite in the air, and the pairs so joined were bound by the etiquette of the night, to escort, to dance, to speak, to remain within reach of one another until the dawn bell rang from the clock tower and released them. The binding was gentle, they said, a tether, not a chain. But Hermione had done enough reading to know that old magic rarely troubled itself with the difference. "You're doing the thing," Ginny murmured at her shoulder, resplendent in emerald, her own mask pushed up into her hair with the impatience of someone who had never once feared a room. "What thing?" "Standing like you're about to be marked for detention." Hermione unlocked her spine by force of will. "I'm perfectly relaxed." "You're counting doors." She was. She stopped. The music thinned. A hush moved through the hall the way cold moves through water, from the center outward, and the black basin began to glow. Not brightly, but with a low internal light, like a coal remembering it had once been fire. The parchment sphere unspooled. Slips separated from the swarm 2 at a time, spiraling up, meeting in the air. And where they met, a small, clean flame bloomed and burned the names into being. 2 lines of silver script, hanging for the length of a held breath, before drifting down to settle over the shoulders of the chosen. Padma Patil and Ernest Macmillan. Seamus Finnegan and Susan Bones. Names rose. Names ignited. Pairs turned to find one another across the crowd with the awkward, formal little bows the tradition demanded, and the musicians took up a slow figure to cover the shuffling. Hermione watched Ginny's slip lift free and marry itself to Neville's, watched her friend laugh and mouth "Oh, thank Merlin" with such open relief that it made something in Hermione's chest ache. The wanting of a night that could be simple. She did not want the night to be simple. She corrected the thought at once. She wanted it to be over. Then 2 slips lifted that were not like the others. She could not have said how she knew. Perhaps the sphere hesitated over them a half-beat too long. Perhaps the flame that took them burned whiter, or perhaps she only imagined that afterward, when she tried to reassemble the moment into something with warning in it. What she saw was the silver script forming, letter by deliberate letter, above the crowd, and the first word was her own name, Hermione Granger, and beneath it, the flame drawing the second line with terrible, unhurried grace, Draco Malfoy. The script hung there. It did not drift down at once. It seemed to wait, the way a person waits to be certain a blow has landed before they finish delivering it. Somewhere to her left, Hermione heard a glass set down against wood with a small, precise click. The sound of a hand that has decided to do one controlled thing because it cannot yet trust itself to do anything else. She did not turn toward it. She kept her eyes on the letters until they finally sank, silver dissolving into the cold air over her shoulders, and the tether took, a sensation not like being seized, but like a thread drawn taut somewhere behind her sternum, a pull with a direction to it. When she breathed, the thread breathed. When she shifted her weight, it drew fractionally tighter, and she understood with a cold and total clarity exactly where in the room the other end of it was anchored. She turned. He was already looking at her. Draco Malfoy stood a little apart from the nearest cluster, as he always stood a little apart, in dress robes so dark a grey they read as black, except where the candlelight found the silver thread at the collar. His mask was plain, no filigree, no ornament, a smooth, pale thing that hid the upper half of his face and left the mouth, and the mouth was doing nothing at all. That was the tell. She had seen Draco Malfoy sneer, seen him goad, seen him wear cruelty like a well-tailored coat. She had never, in 7 years, seen his mouth do nothing. It sat perfectly still, and it was the stillness of a person holding a great weight level so that no one will see it tremble. The whole hall had noticed. Of course it had. Conversations near them died and reassembled themselves into whispers, and Hermione felt the attention land on her skin like a change in weather, that specific prickling awareness of being watched by 100 people who were each pretending to watch something else. A war heroine and a marked man, roped together by a magic that took no requests. She would not give them the satisfaction of a reaction. She lifted her chin. Across the space between them, 20 feet, no more, and the tether humming in it like a plucked string. Draco Malfoy did the only thing the etiquette of the night left him room to do. He crossed the floor toward her. He did not hurry. She recognized that too, because she was doing the same arithmetic he was. A fast approach would look like eagerness and a slow one, like reluctance. and there existed some impossible middle pace that would betray nothing, and he had found it, or was performing, having found it. Each step he took drew the thread behind her sternum shorter, and with every inch it slackened its pull, it seemed instead to gather tension of another kind, a static that lifted the fine hairs along her forearms beneath her sleeves. He stopped an arm's length away, close enough that she could see the grey of his eyes was not, as she had always assumed, a single flat colour, but a cold pale field shot through with darker striations, like the surface of the frozen lake where the ice went deep. Close enough to see that beneath the smooth plane of his mask, a muscle worked once in his jaw and went still. For the length of several heartbeats, neither of them said a word. The music went on somewhere behind him, a slow figure of strings, and the candles burned their pale gold, and the whole gilded, whispering room seemed to narrow to the arm's length of charged air between a boy who had never once had to want her good opinion, and a girl who had promised herself she would never again be at anyone's mercy. He inclined his head, the bow the tradition demanded, precise, correct, and given with the particular stiffness of a body performing a courtesy it did not feel. Granger. Her name in his mouth was careful, not the drawl she remembered, the one that used to bend her surname into something small and dirty. This was flatter, more guarded, a word set down with the same deliberation as that glass she had heard him release. "It appears," he said, and here the old edge surfaced, a thin blade of it, because sarcasm was the last thing he had that still worked. "The evening has a sense of humour." "The evening," she said, and was pleased that her voice came out even, "has terrible taste." Something flickered at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, nothing so generous, but an acknowledgement, the reflex of a duellist who has taken a clean touch and knows it. His hand rose. It was expected. The next figure of the dance required it, and every eye in the hall was cataloguing whether the Malfoy heir and the Granger girl would honour the binding or make a scene that would be in the profit by morning. He offered his hand palm up, gloved in fine dark leather, and on the smallest finger she saw the glint of a silver signet ring pressed cold against the seam. Hermione looked at the offered hand. She thought of every reason not to take it, and found that the magic had already made the list irrelevant, and hated a little that she was almost grateful for that the tradition had stolen the choice, so that whatever her hand did next need not be examined too closely. She lifted her own hand toward his. Her fingers were a breath from his palm, near enough that she could feel the faint warmth radiating from the leather, near enough that the static between their skin gathered into something that made her breath catch high in her throat. And across the hall, from the great doors, the first low toll of an unexpected bell rolled through the room, and every candle flame guttered sideways at once. The bell's single note dissolved into the vaulted dark, and for the space of one indrawn breath, the whole hall stood suspended. 100 masked faces turned toward the great doors, 100 flames leaning as one against an unseen wind. Then the candles righted themselves, the pale gold light steadied, and a murmur ran through the crowd like water finding its level again. The warden's bell. Someone breathed near Hermione's shoulder, and she heard the reverence in it. She had read of this too, in the crumbling account of the tradition she'd found in the library's restricted stacks, a second enchantment layered beneath the first. The lottery bound the pairs, the warden's bell tested them. It rang at intervals no one could predict, and at each toll the tether drew tighter, closing the permitted distance between the joined, so that a night begun at arm's length would end, by dawn, with no distance left at all. A cruelty dressed as courtship. The old blood had liked their romances, the way they liked their inheritances, arranged, inescapable, and binding upon the young whether or not the young consented. She felt it happen. The thread behind her sternum, already taut, gave a slow contraction, reeling in a measured length of the air between herself and Draco Malfoy, until the arm's length that had separated them became something nearer, not touching, but near enough now that when he exhaled, she felt the faint warmth of it stir a loose curl against her temple, and near enough that the clean, cold scent of him reached her, cedar, and beneath it something sharper, the ozone bite of a wand recently used, as though he had cast some small spell on himself before entering, to steady his hands or his face, or both. His jaw tightened. She watched the muscle leap and settle. He had understood the bell's meaning as quickly as she had, and he liked it no better. "Marvelous," he said, very low, so that only she could hear it beneath the resuming strings. "They've built a leash that shortens. You'd know about leashes." The words were out before she weighed them, and she felt the old reflex answer in her blood, the 7-year habit of meeting him blade for blade. But even as she said it, she saw the flinch, not in his face, which stayed schooled behind the pale mask, but in his hand, the one still half offered between them. The gloved fingers curled inward a fraction, the silver signet catching the light, and then with visible effort uncurled again and held their place. He did not fire back. That was wrong. That was so wholly against the pattern of everything she knew of him that Hermione felt the ground of the evening shift beneath her. The way a stair one has climbed 1,000 times will announce, by a single missing tread, that the house is not the house one thought. The Draco Malfoy of memory would have had a retort loaded before she'd finished speaking. This one only stood, hand open, and absorbed the blow. And the absorbing was worse than any answer he could have given, because it made her the one who had struck without cause, and she did not enjoy the taste of that. "I shouldn't have said that," she said. The apology surprised her more than it surprised him. "No." He turned his hand slightly, the offer renewed, the leather palm still waiting. "But you were entitled to. Take my hand, Granger. They're watching to see which of us breaks the binding first, and I find I'd rather disappoint them than give them the story." She looked at the offered hand a second time, and this time she took it. The contact went through her like the toll of the bell itself. His grip was cool and dry, and exactly as controlled as everything else about him. And yet, where their palms met, she felt the faint tremor he could not entirely master, a fine, high vibration running beneath the surface of his stillness, the way the deep ice she'd imagined in his eyes might hum before it cracked. He felt her feel it. She saw the knowledge arrive in the set of his shoulders, saw him draw himself an inch straighter to bury the tell, and understood, all at once, and with a strange lurch of something that was not triumph, that Draco Malfoy was as frightened of this night as she was. The realization rearranged something. The musicians had moved into the figure the whole hall had been waiting for. The Exchange's opening dance, in which every bound pair took the floor together, a slow and formal thing of turns and measured steps that left long seconds of stillness between the movements, so that the dancers had nowhere to hide from one another. Around them, the other couples were assembling into the pattern, and Hermione let Draco draw her out among them because the alternative was to stand rooted while the room watched, and she had spent too much of her life refusing to be the one who fled. His hand found the small of her back. It settled there through the deep blue silk with a lightness that was almost worse than pressure. A hand held deliberately weightless, as though her spine was something that might shatter under any honest touch, or as though he did not trust himself with the honest touch, and so gave her only the ghost of it. She placed her own hand at his shoulder and felt the muscle beneath the dark robes, and the strings swelled, and they began to move. He danced the way he did everything, with a precision drilled so deep it had become a kind of grace. She had expected to have to work to follow him, to fight for the lead, and instead found that he gave her the beat cleanly, guided without gripping, turned her through the figure with a competence that asked nothing of her, but that she trust the frame of his arms. She did not want to trust it. She trusted it anyway, because her body was attired of vigilance, and his was, for once, offering none of the cruelty her memory had promised. "You dance," she said, and hated how surprised it sounded. "I was made to." A turn separated them, spun her out to the length of his arm and reeled her back, and when she came near again, his voice was pitched only for her. "There's a great deal I was made to do, Granger. Dancing is among the least objectionable." The candlelight slid across the pale plane of his mask as they turned, gilding one cheekbone and leaving the other in shadow. And she found herself watching his mouth again because it was the only part of his face the mask left free, and because it kept doing that unfamiliar thing, being still, being honest, refusing the sneer she kept bracing for. Beneath her hand, his shoulder was rigid with the effort of the control he was performing, and she thought, "He is holding himself the way I hold myself. He is counting the exits too." The warden's bell rang again. It came without warning, one low toll rolling out over the strings, and every couple in the hall faltered a half step as the tethers drew tighter all at once. The permitted distance closed. Hermione felt herself drawn in against the pull of the magic until the careful, weightless space Draco had kept between their bodies was gone, until her front was very nearly against his, and the only thing separating them was the last inch he was fighting to preserve. And she felt that fight, felt the tremor of it in the arm at her back, the way his whole frame strained to give her a distance the enchantment was determined to steal. "You can stop that," she said, and her voice had gone unaccountably low. "Holding me off. The magic's decided. You'll only exhaust yourself." "I'm aware of what the magic's decided." His breath moved against her hair. His grip at her back did not slacken from its effort, though a fine sheen had risen along his temple beneath the mask's edge. "It doesn't follow that I have to make it easy." "For whom?" He was silent a moment, turning her slowly through the figure, close now, closer than either of them had stood to the other in the whole of their acquaintance, so close that she could feel the quick, unsteady rise and fall of his chest that his stillness had been built to conceal. "For you," he said at last, and the two words cost him something she could hear. "You didn't ask for this. You certainly didn't ask for me. The least I can do, since neither of us can leave, is not stand here pressed against you like I've any right to the space." Hermione forgot the steps. She did not miss them. His hand caught the lapse, covered it, guided her back into the figure so smoothly that no watcher would have seen the stumble. But for the length of a full breath, she simply stared at him through the eye slits of her silver mask, because in 7 years of knowing Draco Malfoy, she had never once heard him grant that another person had a claim upon a room, a space, a scrap of air that outranked his own. The boy who had owned every corridor he'd ever walked was standing in the middle of the great hall, exhausting himself to hold a courteous inch between his body and hers. Not because the etiquette required it. The etiquette required only that they dance. But because he had decided, privately and at cost, that she was owed the choice the magic had stolen. It undid something in her that his cruelty never could have. Draco. His given name left her before she had decided to use it, and she felt him go very still against her, the whole strained architecture of his control arrested by the sound of it. She had never called him that, not once. 16 years of Malfoy, flat and hard as a slammed door, and now his own name in her mouth in the candlelit dark, and she watched it land in him like a stone dropped into deep water, the ripples of it moving out through his features before he could master them. "Don't," he said. It was barely sound at all. "Don't what?" "Don't say it like that." His hand at her back had begun, without his permission, to draw her the last inch in. She felt it, felt the fight go out of the arm that had held her off all night, felt the warmth of him meet the length of her as the enchantment finally won the ground he defended, and his head bent toward hers until his brow was nearly against the edge of her mask. "Say it like a curse. Say it the way you've always said the other one. I can dance with that. I can dance with your contempt from here until the dawn bell and never once put a foot wrong. But if you say my name like I'm a person, Granger, I don't—" He stopped. His jaw worked. The signet ring pressed cold against her spine where his gloved hand had come, at last, to rest fully open against her. "You don't what?" she said, and her own voice had gone to nothing, and the strings were rising toward the figure's turn, and around them the whole gilded room revolved unseen, and she had stopped counting the exits some time ago, and only now noticed that she had. He lifted his head. Behind the pale mask, his grey eyes held hers, and whatever he had been about to confess was rising to the surface of them, close enough now to read. And the great doors of the hall boomed open on a gust of frozen wind that put out half the candles in the room at a stroke, and every dancer turned toward the dark of the entrance, where a tall figure stood silhouetted against the snow-lit night beyond. The wind died as suddenly as it had come, and the figure in the doorway resolved out of silhouette into something far less dramatic than the drama it had made of its entrance. It was only Filch, of all people, shouldering the great doors closed against the storm with a curse the guests were too well bred to acknowledge. a bundle of firewood clutched to his chest, and snow melting to grey streaks in his thin hair. He had gone out for fuel and let winter in behind him. A house elf hurried forward to relight the gutted candles, and the murmur of the crowd resettled into its silken rhythm. And the moment, whatever it had been, whatever had been rising to the surface of Draco Malfoy's eyes, folded shut like a hand closing over a coin. Hermione felt him withdraw, not physically. The enchantment held them close as ever, her body still nearly against his in the pattern of the dance. But something behind the grey had shuttered itself, retreated to a depth she could no longer read, and the mouth that had been doing its unfamiliar, honest stillness now curved deliberately into the old shape she recognized. The faint, cold sneer he wore the way other men wore cufflinks, as a signal of who he had decided to be. "Well?" he said, and the drawl was back, lacquered over whatever had cracked a moment before. "A rescue. You look relieved, Granger. Were you frightened I might say something sincere?" "I was frightened you might finish a sentence," she returned, and let him have the retreat, because she understood retreats now in a way she had not an hour ago. She had watched him build one in real time. She would not chase him into it. The formal dance was ending. Around the hall, the bound pairs were breaking their frames, drifting toward the long tables of spiced wine and honeyed things that had appeared along the walls, and the tether permitted such movement so long as neither strayed beyond the shrinking leash the warden's bell allowed. Draco released her from the dance hold with a correctness that felt, now, like a wall rebuilt. He did not release her hand. He could not. The etiquette, the binding. But he held it now the way one holds a thing one has been ordered to carry at a formal distance, the warmth gone deliberately out of the grip. She should have been glad of it. The cold hand was easier than the warm one had been. The sneering mouth asked nothing of her that vigilance couldn't answer, whereas the still and honest mouth had asked her to revise 16 years of certainty in the space of a single dance, and revision was exhausting, and she was so tired. She found she was not glad of it. "I need air," she said. "We are, unfortunately, tethered. Where you go, I am dragged, like a dog behind a cart. Then be dragged." She was already moving, and the leash drew him after her whether he liked it or not, and she felt a small, mean satisfaction in it that she recognized as beneath her, and indulged anyway. She threaded through the edge of the crowd toward the smaller door behind the staircase, the one that led onto the gallery corridor overlooking the courtyard, and the enchantment let her go so long as he came. And he came, 3 paces behind, and radiating a displeasure she could feel through the thread between them, like heat off a stove. The corridor was cold and blessedly empty. The candlelight of the hall gave way to the thinner silver of moonlight coming through the tall gallery windows, and beyond the glass, the snow was falling in earnest now, fat, slow flakes drifting down into the courtyard, where the founders' statues stood white-shouldered and patient under the weather. The music was a muffled pulse through the wall. Here there was only the hollow echo of their footsteps on old stone, and the tick of frost settling, and the sound of 2 people breathing who did not quite trust the silence between them. Hermione went to the window and put her bare palm flat against the cold glass and let the chill of it climb into her wrist. Behind her, she heard him stop at the tether's limit. heard the small sound of his gloved hand finding the stone sill. And for a while, neither of them spoke. And the snow came down, and the frost ticked, and the farm music turned in its slow figure without them. "Why did you stop fighting it?" she said at last, to the glass not turning. "In there, the distance. You held it all through the dance, and then you stopped." She heard him exhale. When he answered, his voice had lost the lacquer. The corridor was too empty and too dark to hold a performance up in. "Because it was a stupid thing to spend myself on," he said. "Holding an inch. The magic was always going to take it. I only wanted—" He stopped. She heard the leather of his glove tighten against the stone. "I wanted there to be one thing, tonight, that I'd given you instead of taken, even if it was only an inch, even if it was only for an hour. It seems I couldn't manage even that." Hermione turned from the window. He had taken off his mask. She had not heard him do it. The pale thing hung now from his fingers at his side. And the face beneath it was worse than the mask had been, because the mask had been smooth and blank, and this was neither. In the moonlight, the sharp architecture of him looked exhausted. The grey eyes ringed and dark, the pale hair silver blue in the cold light, and across his features was written something she had spent 7 years insisting he did not possess. Not the sneer, not the cold amusement, something worn thin and held very carefully still, the way a person holds a wound they've decided not to mention. "Take yours off," he said. "If you would. I find I can't stand talking to the silver bird. I'd rather know which of us I'm actually damning myself in front of." Her hands rose to the ribbon at the back of her head before she had decided to obey him. The filigree came away cold from her cheek, and the corridor air met her bared face like water, and she stood before Draco Malfoy with nothing between his eyes and hers, and watched him look at her, and watched him not look away. "There," she said, when the silence had gone on too long. "The actual person. Disappointed?" "No." The word came out of him roughly, as though it had cost more than a single syllable should. He turned his face back to the window, to the falling snow, and she watched his profile against the silver light. The straight nose, the mouth she kept returning to, the jaw held level under its old habit of control. "That's rather the trouble, Granger. I've spent a great deal of effort over the years being disappointed in you. It was restful. It required nothing of me. I could stand across a room and think there's the Granger girl, insufferable beneath me, and the thought did all the work of keeping you at a distance so that I never had to do it myself." His gloved hand had begun, absently, to turn the signet ring round and round his smallest finger. "And then the war happened, and I watched what you did and what I did, and the two things would not fit into the story I'd been telling. And the disappointment went out of me like heat out of a stone, and I was left standing across rooms, thinking nothing that let me keep you at a distance at all. And I have hated it, Granger. I have hated every corridor I've had to watch you walk down, knowing I no longer had a single true reason to think myself above you, and every true reason to think the opposite." He had not looked at her through any of it. He said it to the snow. Hermione stood very still. The cold from the window at her back had climbed all the way into her shoulders now, and she barely felt it, because the thread behind her sternum had gone taut in a way that had nothing to do with the enchantment, and she understood that she had just been handed something, that this rigid, guarded, exhausting boy had just set a truth down between them the way he'd set that glass down at the moment their names ignited, with the same terrible care, because it was heavy, and he did not trust his hands, and he had decided to do it anyway. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. Her voice was not steady. She let it not be steady. "You could have danced with my contempt until dawn. You said so yourself. You had the whole thing planned. Sneer, drawl, retreat. Why break it?" He turned his head, then, and looked at her, and the moonlight caught the striations of grey she'd noticed in the hall, the deep ice of them, and she saw that the ice had, in fact, cracked. "Because you called me by my name," he said, "and meant it, and I have not, in a very long time, been called by my name by someone who wasn't preparing to ask something of me or to remind me of what my family did. You said it like I was only a person standing in a room. And I have wanted, for longer than I'll admit, even here in the dark where no one can hold me to it, to be a person standing in a room to you. Just that. Not the Malfoy heir. Not the boy who let them in. Not the arm with the... His hand moved unconsciously to his left forearm, closed over the fabric of his sleeve, and stopped. Just a person, standing in a room, with you. The music turned behind the wall. The snow came down. The frost ticked in the leads of the tall windows, and the founders stood white and patient in the courtyard below, and Hermione Granger looked at the person standing in the room with her and felt 16 years of certainty come apart in her hands like wet parchment, softly, without a sound. She crossed the space the tether allowed. She had not planned to. Her feet carried her before the reasons could assemble their objections, and she stopped close to him, closer than the binding required, close enough to see the pulse moving at his throat above the silver-threaded collar. And she lifted her hand, the bare one, the one that had been cold against the glass. And she did not quite know what she meant to do with it, until it was already rising toward the side of his face, toward the exhausted line of his jaw, toward the person he had just, with such cost, allowed her to see. His breath stopped. She watched it stop. He went utterly still under the approach of her hand, the way a wild thing stills, not from calm, but from the unbearable tension of not knowing whether the hand means to strike or to stay, and his eyes came down to hers and held there, wide and grey and stripped of every defence he owned. And from the far end of the gallery corridor came the bright, careless sound of laughter and approaching footsteps, a pair of masked revellers spilling out of the hall in search of the same dark quiet. And Hermione's hand froze an inch from his skin in the sudden intruding light of their raised wands. Hermione's hand fell back to her side as though the wand light had scalded it. She stepped away, 1 pace, 2, as far as the tether would grant her, and turned to the window with her heart going hard against her ribs. And beside her, Draco reassembled himself with a speed that would have impressed her if it had not just then hurt. By the time the 2 revellers had drifted close enough to recognize, the pale mask was back over his face, and the drawl was back in his mouth, and the person she had almost touched had been folded away somewhere she could no longer reach. "Granger," he said, loudly enough to carry, bored enough to wound. If you're quite finished sulking at the weather, I believe the etiquette obliges us to at least pretend we can tolerate the crush. Shall we? The revellers, a Ravenclaw boy and his bound partner, giggling, half in their cups, took one look at the famous mismatched pair and lost their nerve for the corridor, retreating back toward the hall with the particular haste of people who have blundered into a tension they cannot name. Their wand light went with them. The silver moonlight reclaimed the gallery, and the two of them stood alone again in it. And the mask was still on his face, and the coldness still in his voice. And Hermione understood that the interruption had done more than break a moment. It had frightened him back behind his walls, and now he was rebuilding them at speed, brick by brick, in front of her. "You don't have to do that," she said quietly. "Do what?" "Put it back on. The other one. The sneer." She did not look at him. She watched his reflection in the dark glass, a pale ghost hovering over the falling snow. "You took your mask off and told me the truth, and then two idiots laughed in a corridor, and you've decided the truth was a mistake. I can see you deciding it. Don't." His reflection went still. "It was a mistake," he said. "It's the sort of thing one says in the dark and regrets by the second bell. You do well to forget it. I intend to." "You won't, though." She turned to face the real him instead of the reflection. "You never forget anything. That's your whole trouble, isn't it? You remember everything you've ever done, and everything that was done to you, and you file it all away behind that face, and the file is so heavy you can barely stand up straight, and the only rest you ever get is the hour or two you spend being disappointed in someone else so you don't have to look at your own drawer of it." The words came out of her in a rush, and she saw them land, saw the flinch he couldn't quite bury this time, the small involuntary tightening around the eyes above the mask's edge. "I know, because I do it too. Not the disappointment, the filing, the heaviness. I count exits, Draco. I have counted the exits of every room I've entered since the war, and I have never once told a living soul, and I'm telling you now in a cold corridor, because you told me a true thing, and I'll be damned if I let you take it back and stand here alone with mine." The snow came down. The music turned. His breathing had changed. She could hear it, shallower now, less controlled. And his gloved hand had come up to the edge of his mask, hovering, not quite committing. "Take it off," she said. "Please." He took it off. The face beneath was the true one again, the exhausted, grey-eyed, honest one. And this time, when it emerged, she did not let a corridor's worth of silence stretch between them. She held his gaze and did not look away, and let him see that she meant to stay in the discomfort of it with him. And after a moment, something in his shoulders came down half an inch, the smallest of surrenders, the weight shifting rather than lifting. "You count exits," he said. "Every room." "How many does this corridor have?" "2." She almost smiled. "The gallery door behind you and the servants' stair at the far end. The window doesn't count. 4-story drop to the courtyard, and the leads are iced. You'd never get the latch." He looked at her for a long moment, and then he did something she had never seen him do in 7 years of knowing him. He laughed. It was not the cruel sound she had catalogued and braced against 1,000 times. It was quieter than that, and rougher, dragged up out of some place that did not get much use. and it changed his whole face while it lasted. Took 10 years off it, and Hermione stood in the cold and watched Draco Malfoy laugh at something true she'd said, and felt the strangest sensation move through her. A warmth that had nowhere to do with the enchantment, rising up under the cold, insisting on itself. "Merlin, Granger," he said when it had passed, shaking his head, the exhausted eyes gone bright for a moment. "You're the most frightening person I've ever met, and I've had tea with people who'd have killed you for sport." "I know," she said. "I was in the room for some of those teas, from under the table, admittedly." The bright went out of his eyes at that, but not into coldness this time, into something graver, something that looked, for one unguarded second, almost like grief. His hand rose. She thought for a wild instant that he meant to reach for her, and her breath caught, but instead the gloved fingers went to his own left sleeve again, to the forearm, closing over the fabric there the way they had before. And this time he did not stop the gesture halfway. This time he held the arm and looked at it and looked at her. "You know what's under here," he said. It was not a question. "Yes. You saw it, at the trials, when they made me roll the sleeve back for the record." "Yes." He was quiet a moment. The snow ticked against the glass. When he spoke again, his voice had gone very low and very level. The voice of a man setting down something heavier than a glass, heavier than a truth, the heaviest thing he had. "I was 16, he said. "I know that's no excuse. I've heard every version of how it's no excuse, most of them in my own head, at 3 a.m. for 2 years now. I'm not offering it as one. I'm only telling you the number because you were 16 too, weren't you, running through that castle in the dark trying to save all our lives? And I was 16 in a different part of the same castle, failing to be brave enough to refuse a thing I knew was monstrous. And I have never once, in all the time since, been able to make those 2 16s exist in the same world without one of them being unforgivable." His grip tightened on the arm. His knuckles, where the gloves stretched over them, had gone white. "So, I stopped trying. I put the file away. I got very good at corridors and contempt. And then they put your name and mine in the same fire and dragged me across a ballroom to you, and you called me by my name like I was a person, and the whole apparatus I'd built for not thinking about it." He stopped. He was not going to finish the sentence. She could see that he was not going to be able to. So she finished the distance instead. She crossed the tether's grudging length a second time, and this time no laughter came from the corridor, no wand light, no rescue. This time she reached him, and she did not hover. She put her bare hand over his gloved one, the one gripping his own forearm white-knuckled, the one holding down the heaviest thing he owned. And she did not pull the sleeve back, and she did not tell him it was fine, because it was not fine, and they both knew it was not fine, and a lie would have been an insult to the truth he just bled onto the cold stone. She only held her hand over his, warm over cold, living over guarded, until she felt the terrible tension in his grip begin, by fractions, to ease. "I don't forgive you," she said quietly. "I want to be honest, because you were. I can't hand you that. It isn't mine to hand. It belongs to people who aren't here, and I won't pretend to speak for them." She felt him nod under her hand, felt him accept it and go on breathing, which was the thing she had needed to know he could do while hearing it. But I'll tell you what is mine. I stopped being afraid of you somewhere in the last hour. Not because you earned it, because I finally saw that the thing I'd been afraid of was never you. It was the boy in the story I'd told myself about you. And he was easier to hate than a person exhausting himself to hold an inch of air. You're a person, Draco, standing in a room, with me. That's all I've got to give you tonight, and I don't know if it's worth anything, but it's true, and I thought you should have one true thing back. His hand had turned over under hers. She had not noticed him do it. His fingers had unlaced from his own arm and turned palm up and closed gently around her hand. And now they held each other's hands in the cold silver light, with the snow coming down beyond the glass and the far music turning. And he was looking at her, and the ice in his eyes had not just cracked now, but wholly given way. And what was underneath it was not disappointment, and not contempt, and not the sneer, but something so open and so undefended that she felt her own breath go ragged looking at it. "Granger," he said, and her name was barely a word, more breath than sound. His free hand rose, slowly, the way a man reaches towards something he is certain will vanish. And his fingertips found a loose curl at her temple, the one his breath had stirred during the dance, and he tucked it back with a tenderness that was almost unbearable to receive. His hand did not fall away. It stayed, cupping the side of her face, his gloved thumb moving once across her cheekbone. And she leaned into it before she could decide not to, turned her face a fraction into the warmth of his palm, and his eyes dropped to her mouth, and hers to his, and the last inch of cold air between them began, at last, to close of its own accord. And the warden's bell tolled through the castle, long and low and certain, and the tether behind her sternum drew tight enough to steal the breath from both of them at once. The bell's toll had drawn them the last inch together, and then, cruelly, kept drawing, the tether contracting past the point of tenderness into something that pressed, that insisted, so that Hermione found herself brought fully against him, with her hand trapped between their chests, and his palm still cupping her face, and neither of them able to move back, even had they wished to. For a moment they simply stood, locked in the enchantment's fist, breathing each other's breath, close enough that she could feel his heart going hard and quick beneath her caught hand, quick as her own, betraying every ounce of the composure his face had spent 7 years perfecting. And then the temperature of the corridor dropped, all at once, as though someone had opened a door onto the deep of winter itself. Frost bloomed across the tall gallery windows in a rushing crackle, ferns and spears of it racing up the glass. And the silver moonlight went out as clouds swallowed the moon, and the far pulse of the music behind the wall stuttered and fell silent. Hermione turned her head in the circle of Draco's hand and saw the snow beyond the glass no longer falling, but hanging, suspended, 10,000 flakes frozen mid-descent in the courtyard, as if time itself had caught its breath. The candlelit warmth that had leaked from the hall was gone. Their exhalations came white now, plumes of it in the sudden black cold, and the only light left was the faint blue phosphorescence rising off the frost. "The solstice storm," Draco said, very low, and she felt the words move through his chest against her trapped hand. "It comes with the old magic. My grandmother spoke of it. When the binding nights were held at the manor, they'd wall the guests in against it. It isn't weather, Granger. It's the year turning over, the longest dark. It passes. But while it holds, the castle closes its doors, and no charm of ours will open them. As if to confirm him, from the direction of the great hall came the deep, resonant sound of the doors sealing themselves, a sound like a vault closing, and then a silence more total than any Hermione had known within these walls. No music, no distant laughter, no footsteps. Only the two of them in the black gallery with the frozen snow hanging beyond the glass, and the frost climbing, and their breath going up in white plumes between their faces. The tether, having done its work, relaxed by a grudging degree. She could have stepped back now. She did not. His hand was still against her face, and the cold had made a small, warm country of it, and she found she was reluctant to leave the borders of that country for the deep winter of the empty corridor. "How long does it hold?" she asked. "Until it doesn't. An hour. 3. My grandmother said a full night, once, when she was a girl." His thumb moved across her cheekbone again, absently, as though he had forgotten it was doing so, as though the gesture had already become a thing his hand did without asking him. "We're walled in with each other until the dark turns, Granger. You and I. It seems the evening sense of humour hasn't run dry after all." "We should move," she said, and did not move. "It's freezing. We'll want somewhere with a hearth. The gallery's the worst place in the castle for cold. No fireplace the whole length of it. The architects meant it for summer walking. You know the architecture of the galleries. I know the architecture of the whole castle. I read Hogwarts, a history 11 times. She was aware she was talking to fill the silence, to give her body an errand other than the one it wanted, which was to stay exactly where it was with his hand on her face and his heart under her palm. There's a hearth room off the far end of the servants' stair, small. The house elves use it to warm the linens. It'll have a fire laid, it always does, and flint if the fire's out. We won't freeze there. Then lead, he said. You're the one who counts exits. She led. It cost her something to step out of the warm country of his hand, and she saw that it cost him something to let her. His fingers trailed from her cheek slowly, reluctant to give up the contact, and the cold rushed in to take the place where his palm had been. But the tether allowed them the length of the corridor now, if they walked together, and so they went side by side down the black gallery, their breath ghosting white ahead of them, the frozen snow hanging in the windows on their left like a held note, the hollow echo of their footsteps, the only sound in all the sealed and silent castle. The hearth room was where she'd promised it would be, and small as she'd promised, low-ceilinged and close, with a wide stone fireplace at one end, and drying racks of linen along the walls, and the good, clean smell of wood smoke and lavender soaked into every surface. The fire had burned down to embers, but the embers were live, and Draco crossed to it and went to one knee on the flagstones and fed it kindling from the basket with a competence that surprised her, until she remembered that competence was the whole of how he'd been raised, that there was probably no small useful thing in the world he had not been drilled in, dancing and fire-laying, and the correct fork, all of it the same rigid inheritance. The flames climbed. The room began, slowly, to warm. He did not rise at once. He stayed on one knee before the fire with the light climbing gold up the pale planes of his face, and Hermione stood behind him and watched the tension he'd carried all night begin to unclench in the heat, watched his shoulders come down, watched him become for a moment only a tired young man warming his hands at a hearth in the dark. She had never in her life had cause to think of Draco Malfoy as young. He had always seemed to her a fixed and finished thing, cruel and complete. But on one knee in the firelight, with the exhaustion showing plain on his unmasked face, he looked no older than he was, 18, marked, sealed into a castle by the turning of the year, and looking into flames as though he had a great deal to say to them. "You can sit down, Granger," he said without turning. "I can feel you standing there deciding whether I'm going to bite. I'm not. I've done my worst for one evening. I told you I don't forgive myself, and you told me you don't either. And there isn't much left to bear after that. Sit. You've been on your feet for hours and you count exits, which means you never sit with your back to a door, so take the corner there. You can see both ways from it, the stair and the passage, and stop hovering. It's making my neck itch." Hermione went to the corner he'd named. He was right. She could see both ways from it. She had not told him that was what she needed, and he had known it anyway, had read it off her the way she'd read his stillness in the hall, and the fact of being read, of being understood in her particular vigilance by someone who shared its shape, was so unfamiliar and so undefended a thing that she sat down rather harder than she meant to, and drew her knees up and wrapped her arms around them, and said nothing at all for a while, and let the fire climb, and let the strange sealed peace of the room settle over the two of them. He came and sat near her, not against her, the tether didn't require it now, but near, his back to the warm stone of the hearth, his long legs stretched toward the fire, close enough that she could have leaned sideways and set her head on his shoulder, had she been another kind of person on another kind of night. She thought about it. She was aware of thinking about it, and aware of him being aware, the space between them gone thick and warm with the not doing of it. "Tell me something," she said to the fire. "Something true, not the heavy thing. You've spent that one. Something small. I want to know a small, true thing about you that isn't in any file." He was quiet a moment, turning the signet ring on his smallest finger, watching the flames. "I hate the manor," he said. "I've never told anyone that. Everyone assumes I love it. The great Malfoy seat, the peacocks, the gilt. I loathe it. It's cold in every season, and it echoes, and there are rooms in it where, well, there are rooms in it. And when I was small, before I knew what we were, my favourite place in the whole world wasn't any grand hall. It was the kitchen. The undercroft where the elves worked, warm and low-ceilinged, and it smelled of bread. And I'd hide there when my father had guests. And one of the old elves, Bibby, would let me sit on a stool and eat the ends of the loaves while she worked. And she never once told me I oughtn't to be there." He gave a small breath that was not quite a laugh. "This room reminds me of it. That's why I stopped fighting when you said hearth room. I'd have followed you anywhere that smelled of bread and lavender. It's the closest I've felt to safe in about 10 years, Granger, and it's a linen closet, and I'm sitting in it with the last person on earth I'd have chosen to see me want something so small and so pathetic. Hermione did not say anything for a long moment. Then, slowly, she unwrapped her arms from around her knees, and she leaned, not all the way, not the head on the shoulder, but sideways, until her arm was against his arm, shoulder to shoulder, warm through the 2 layers of their sleeves, a small, deliberate pressure that said, "I heard you more plainly than any words could have." He went still at the contact. She felt him decide not to pull away. She felt, more than that, the slow, careful shift of his weight as he leaned the smallest fraction back against her, returning the pressure, accepting it, the 2 of them holding each other up shoulder to shoulder against the warm stone with the fire going gold and the storm hanging frozen and silent beyond the sealed doors of the castle. "It isn't pathetic," she said quietly, "wanting to feel safe. It's the least pathetic thing there is. I've wanted almost nothing else for 2 years." She turned her head and found his face nearer than she'd expected, turned toward hers, the firelight moving in the grey of his eyes. "Draco, the moment in the corridor, before the bell rang. Were you going to—" "Yes," he said. He did not pretend to misunderstand. "I was." "Do you still—" "Granger, I have wanted to since you called me by my name in the middle of that ballroom, and I've been fighting it every second since with everything I have left, which by now is not very much." His hand had come up between them. His fingers found hers where they rested on the flagstone and laced through them, cold leather and warm skin, and his eyes had dropped once more to her mouth. "Tell me to stop, and I'll stop. Tell me this is the storm and the dark and the sealed doors making fools of us, and I'll believe you, and we'll sit here and talk about the architecture until the year turns. But if you don't tell me to stop—" She did not tell him to stop. She turned toward him fully in the firelight, and he toward her, and his hand came up to her face again, and hers found the front of his robes, and the last of the warm space between them began to disappear as they leaned in together at last, slowly, unhurried, 2 people who had waited 7 years and 1 long night for the inch to finally close. And with a roar, the sealed doors of the distant great hall burst open, and warmth and light and the sudden blare of resumed music came flooding back through the castle as the solstice storm broke and released the walls, and voices and running footsteps spilled into every corridor at once. They broke apart. There was no decision in it, no choice either of them made. The storm's breaking simply flooded the sealed peace of the little room with the world again, with sound and warmth and the certainty of other people, and the return of the world reminded them both in the same instant of who the world had decided they were. Hermione felt Draco's hand fall from her face as though the resumed music had commanded it. She felt her own hand release the front of his robes, and she watched, with a sinking she could not name, the shutters come down again behind his eyes, faster this time, more brutal, because he had been caught nearer the edge and had further to retreat. He got to his feet. He did it with the fluid correctness of a man remembering his posture, and the tired young person who had confessed a love of bread and lavender in the firelight was gone as though he had never been, folded away behind the straight spine and the level jaw and the mouth already reaching for its old cold shape. "Well," he said, "that's that then. The storm's broken. We're not walled in with each other after all. You'll be glad of it." Draco? They'll be looking for the famous pair, wondering whether Grangers murdered the Malfoy heir in a linen closet or the reverse. He was already moving toward the passage, and the tether dragged her up after him, whether she willed it or not. Best we're seen, best we're ordinary. Two people the fire threw together, tolerating each other until the dawn bell. Nothing more, nothing that anyone need trouble to write down. Stop. She planted her feet. The tether went taut between them, and he was jerked to a halt at the door, and he turned back to her with something dangerous rising in the grey. Stop talking like that, like the last 2 hours didn't happen. You told me true things. I told you true things. You had your hand on my face, and I had mine on your robes, and we were about to. And it would have been a mistake. It came out of him louder than he'd meant it to. She saw him hear his own volume and hate it. His hand had gone white-knuckled around the mask he still carried, the pale thing crushed now in his grip. Do you not understand what you are, Granger? Do you not understand what I am? You are the brightest thing to come out of that war. You are the girl who saved everyone, and I am the boy who let them in. That is not a story that has a linen closet in it, where the two of them... It doesn't happen. It can't happen. It would ruin. He stopped himself. She saw the old script rise in his throat, the melodrama of self-loathing he'd been reaching for, and she saw him refuse it, clamp down on it, because he'd learned in the last 2 hours that she saw through it. What came out instead, when it came, was quieter and worse and far more true. It would ruin you, he said. Not me. I'm already ruined. There's nothing left of my name to spoil. But you. They'd never let you have it. The papers, the world, the people whose forgiveness isn't yours to give and isn't mine to earn. They'd take one look at Hermione Granger holding hands with a Death Eater's son, and they would spend the rest of your life making you pay for it. And you have paid enough, Granger. You've paid and paid. I won't be one more thing you have to carry. I won't be the drawer in your file that never closes. His voice had dropped to almost nothing. So, yes, I'm talking like it didn't happen, because the alternative is letting it happen, and I've done enough damage to enough people, and I will not do it to you. Hermione stood very still in the passage with the music swelling somewhere ahead and the firelight of the hearth-room warm at her back, and she understood that she was looking at the truest and most frightened thing Draco Malfoy had shown her all night. Not the confession about the arm, not the confession about the manor. This. A boy so certain he was contamination that he had decided to protect her from himself, and had dressed his terror up as nobility, and believed it, and was walking away from the only thing he'd wanted in years, because he had convinced himself the wanting itself would poison her. And she was furious, not at him, through him. At the war, and the papers, and the pure-blood grandmothers, and the whole grinding machine that had taken a boy who hid in kitchens and eaten bread with elves and made him believe he was rot. And she felt her own hands go white, felt her nails press half-moons into her palms, and when she spoke, her voice shook with the effort of not shouting it. How dare you? He blinked. Of all the things he'd braced for, it was plainly not that. How dare you decide for me? She crossed the space the tether allowed, close now, her face lifted to his, and she watched him actually retreat a half step from the force of it, before the tether caught him. You stand there, and you tell me you won't let me be ruined, as though my ruin were yours to permit or forbid, as though I were a thing to be protected from my own choices. Do you know how many people have done that to me, Draco? Decided what I could carry, managed me for my own good? The Order did it. The Ministry did it. My own friends do it, kindly, all the time. Poor Hermione. She's been through so much. Don't trouble her with this. And now you, of all people, the one person tonight who saw me count exits and understood it, the one person who read my vigilance right and gave me the corner where I could watch both doors. Now you decide you know better than I do what I can bear. His mouth had come open. Nothing came out of it. I have made my choices in worse rooms than this, she went on, lower now, the fury banking into something steadier and more terrible. I chose to run into that castle. I chose to have my mind altered rather than betray a location. I chose to stand in a courtroom and testify, and I chose, do you remember, at your trial when they asked me, I chose to say that you had lowered your wand, that you had not named Harry when you could have. I chose to say it, Draco, because it was true, and because I had decided that day, long before any fire put our names together, that I would not let the world make you only the boy who let them in when I had seen with my own eyes that you were also the boy who couldn't finish it. So do not stand in a linen closet corridor and tell me you'll spare me the ruin of choosing you. I have already chosen things about you. I chose them 2 years ago in a courtroom. This is only the smallest of them. The passage rang with silence when she finished. The music turned distant and gold. His mask had slipped from his crushing fingers to the flagstones, and he had not noticed, and his face, his true face, undefended, wrecked, was staring at her as though she had reached into his chest and rearranged something load-bearing. That was you, he said. His voice had gone to gravel. I never knew who. The testimony was sealed. I knew someone had spoken for the wand. I never knew it was me. Why? It was barely a word. Why would you? After everything because it was true. She said it simply, all the fury gone out of her now, only the truth left, plain and warm as the fire behind her. And because, even then, before I'd let myself know it, I couldn't stand to watch them make you only one thing. I think some part of me has been arguing with the story of you for 2 years, Draco. I think I've been quietly refusing to let you be as simple as everyone needed you to be, and I didn't understand why until tonight, until you took your mask off in that corridor, and I finally saw the person I'd been defending without permission. She reached down, slowly, and picked his fallen mask up off the flagstones, and she did not hand it back to him. She set it aside on the sill of a dark window out of his reach. So no, you don't get to protect me from this. You don't get to be noble and walk away and leave me to carry the knowing of it alone. If it's a mistake, it's mine to make. If it ruins me, it's mine to be ruined by. You've spent tonight giving me true things, and 1 real inch of air you exhausted yourself to hold. Let me give you one back. Let me choose you out loud, the way I already chose you in silence, and stop deciding my griefs for me. He was shaking. She could see it now, fine tremors running through the rigid frame, the deep ice not merely cracked, but gone entirely to water, and his hands had come up in front of him half open, as though he did not know whether to reach for her or hold himself together, and could not do both. "Granger," he said. "Hermione." Her given name in his mouth for the first time, and it undid her exactly as her use of his had undone him, and she saw him understand the symmetry of it, even as it broke over her. If I let this happen, if I stop fighting it, I don't have a second self to hide behind afterward. Do you understand? I've spent 7 years being able to sneer and walk away. If I let myself have this, and it goes wrong, there's no mask left. You'll have all of me, and I'll have no way back to solid ground. I don't know how to want something this much, and survive not getting it. I've never let myself find out." "Then don't find out." She stepped the last of the distance. She took his shaking, half-open hands in both of hers and stilled them, and she looked up into the wrecked grey of his eyes, and she felt her own heart going hard and certain against her ribs. "Don't fight it. Don't walk away and be noble at me. Stay. Choose it back. I'm not asking you to survive not getting it, Draco. I'm asking you to get it." His breath left him all at once, a long, unsteady exhalation, and something in him that had been braced against her for the whole of the night, for the whole of 7 years, finally, quietly gave way. His forehead came down to rest against hers. His hands turned in hers and gripped, hard, holding on like a man who has stopped pretending he isn't drowning. And she felt the warmth of his breath against her lips, and his eyes closed, and hers closed, and there was nothing left between them now. No mask, no inch, no story, no war, nothing at all but the last held breath before. And down the passage, bright and carrying and utterly without mercy, came Ginny's voice calling her name, and the clatter of the 8th years pouring out of the reopened hall to find their storm-scattered partners before the dawn. This time, neither of them flinched apart. Hermione heard Ginny's voice ring down the passage, heard the clatter of the crowd, and felt Draco's whole body tense to withdraw. The old reflex, the reach for the mask that was no longer in his hand. And she did the only thing that could possibly hold him. She tightened her grip on his hands and did not let go. She kept her forehead against his, and she said, very low and very steady, "No, stay. Let them see. If we jump apart now, you'll spend the next week convincing yourself it was nothing, and it wasn't nothing. And I'm not going to let you edit it back into nothing. Stay exactly where you are." He stayed. It cost him. She could feel the cost of it running through his hands, the tremor of a man overriding an instinct 7 years deep, holding still while the world came around the corner to look at him. But he stayed, forehead to hers, hands locked in hers. And when Ginny's boots rounded the turn of the passage and her voice broke off mid-syllable at the sight of them, Draco Malfoy did not let go of Hermione Granger's hands. The silence that fell was enormous. Ginny had stopped dead at the mouth of the passage, with 2 or 3 others piling up behind her, and Hermione lifted her head at last and turned to meet her friend's stare over the top of it, and she watched the astonishment move across Ginny's face, the quick flick of the eyes from Hermione's hands to Draco's face, to the space of no distance between them, the working out of it, the disbelief. And then, because Ginny had always been faster and kinder than she let on, the slow arrival of something that was not judgment. Ginny looked at Hermione's face, really looked, and whatever she saw there, Some openness, some unguardedness, some plain visible thing that Hermione had not shown anyone in 2 years. It changed the shape of her mouth from a demand into a question. "Hermione," Ginny said carefully. "All right?" And Hermione understood the whole of what was being asked in those 2 words. "Do you need help? Has he done something? Should I get you out of this?" The old vigilance, the friends who managed her griefs for her, love wearing the face of protection. And she felt Draco go rigid beside her, braced for exactly that reading of the scene, braced to be the villain of a rescue. And she made her choice for the 2nd time that night, out loud, in front of witnesses, the way she'd told him she would. "I'm all right, Gin." She did not let go of his hands. "I'm better than I've been in a long while, if you want the truth. Nothing's wrong here. Nothing's happened that I didn't choose." She held her friend's eyes steadily. "Give us the passage. Please, I'll find you before the bell." The moment hung. One of the boys behind Ginny started to say something with a laugh in it, something that in another second would have been cruel. And Ginny, without turning, without raising her voice, put a hand back against his chest and stopped it in his throat. She looked at Hermione a moment longer. Then she nodded, once, slowly, and there was a whole conversation in the nod, years of it, the kind of understanding that does not require sentences. "Before the bell," Ginny said. "You promised." And she gathered the others with a look and swept them back toward the light and the music. And her voice as she went was bright and loud and deliberately covering, redirecting them, giving the famous pair the empty passage back. And Hermione loved her so fiercely in that moment that her eyes stung with it. Then they were alone again, and the crowd's noise receded, and it was only the 2 of them in the dim passage with the firelight of the hearth-room warm behind, and the resumed music turning gold and distant ahead, and Draco Malfoy standing very still, holding both her hands and staring at her as though she had done something impossible. "You didn't let go," he said. "No." She thought, "She came around that corner ready to hex me into the lake, Granger. I saw it." "And you didn't let go, and you told her nothing was wrong, and you sent her away." His voice had gone strange, unsteady, wondering. "Do you understand what you just did? You spent it, in front of a witness, whatever it costs you tomorrow when she talks. And she'll talk, they all talk. You've already paid it. You chose me where someone could see. You can't take that back." "I don't want to take it back." She squeezed his hands. That was rather the point. Something broke in his face then. Not the wreckage of grief that had been there before. Something gentler and far more overwhelming. The look of a man who has spent so long certain of his own worthlessness that a single act of being chosen out loud has come near to breaking him open. His breath hitched. He looked down at their joined hands, as if he could not quite believe they were real. And then he did something she would remember for the rest of her life. He lifted her hands, both of them, and he bowed his head over them, and he pressed his mouth. Not a kiss, quite, something more like a benediction, something reverent. To her knuckles, first one hand and then the other. His eyes closed, his lips warm against her cold skin, and she felt the silver signet ring cool against her fingers where his hand cradled hers, and she felt him tremble. "I don't have the words," he said against her hands. "I was raised with every word. elocution, rhetoric, the correct phrase for every occasion. And I'm standing here with nothing. There's no correct phrase for this. There's no drilled response for someone choosing you in a corridor when they had every reason on earth to walk away. He lifted his head. His eyes were wet, and he did not hide it, did not turn his face, let her see the water standing in the grey. So, I'll just tell you the plain thing, since plain is all I've got left. I stopped being able to hate you a long time ago, and I've spent every day since terrified that if I couldn't hate you, I'd have to feel the other thing, and the other thing was too big to survive. So I built masks and corridors and contempt to keep from feeling it. And tonight, you took every mask off me one by one, and I felt it. And it turns out I was right. It is too big. But I'm feeling it anyway, and I haven't died of it. And that's... Granger, that's your doing. You made a thing I was sure would kill me into a thing I can stand inside of. I don't know how to thank someone for that. I don't think there's a fork for it. She laughed. She couldn't help it. The fork undid her. And the laugh came out half a sob, and she reached up with one freed hand and touched his wet cheek, brushed the water from beneath his eye with her thumb, the way he had brushed the curl from her temple hours ago. And he leaned his face into her palm and closed his eyes and let her hold the weight of his head in her hand. "You don't thank me," she said softly. "You just don't put the masks back on. That's all. That's the only thing I want. Not gratitude. Just don't disappear behind them again the next time the world comes around a corner. Stay a person standing in a room. It's harder than any of the rest of it, I know. I count exits, remember. I know exactly how hard it is to stand in a room without an escape route. But we could try it. Together. Two people who never learned how to stay, learning to stay. If you wanted. If I wanted. His eyes opened, and there was something almost like the old dry humour in them now, but warmed all the way through, gentled past anything cruel. "Hermione, I have wanted, in a way I've been ashamed of and frightened by and utterly unable to name since approximately the first hour of this evening. And if I'm honest with myself in the ruthless way you keep forcing me to be, since a great deal longer than that. I have wanted so much it made me stupid. It made me hold an inch of air until I sweated through my collar. It made me tell you about the elf and the bread. Of course I want. Wanting was never the difficulty. The difficulty was believing I was allowed. You're allowed, she said. I'm telling you. Right now, in this passage, with the bell coming and Ginny keeping the crowd off us and the fire still going in the room behind us, you're allowed. That's my whole ruling on the matter, and I'm the one who chose you in a courtroom 2 years ago, so I'd say I've earned the standing to hand it down. He gave a wet, unsteady breath of a laugh. His hand came up and framed her face fully, both hands now, cradling her jaw, his thumbs at her cheekbones. And he looked at her with the whole of himself in his eyes, undefended, unmasked. No inch of air held anywhere between them anymore, because he had finally stopped exhausting himself to keep it. The firelight moved gold over both their faces. The distant music turned. Somewhere far off, the crowd laughed and drank and waited for the dawn. And here in the dim passage, two people who had spent 7 years perfecting the art of never being reached stood close enough to feel each other breathe, and neither of them was counting exits anymore. Then I'm choosing it back, he said, out loud. So you'll never be able to tell yourself you carried this alone, the way I'd have made you carry it if I'd walked away like a coward dressed as a saint. I'm choosing you back, Hermione Granger, here, where it can be seen. Whatever it costs, whatever they write, whatever the world decides to do to a war heroine who let a Death Eater's son hold her face in a corridor, I choose it back, and I'll keep choosing it, and I'll stand in every room without an exit for the rest of my life, if it means standing in them with you. She rose onto her toes, his head bent down. The last of the warm air between their mouths went to nothing at all, and she felt his breath break against her lips, and his hands tightened at her jaw, and hers fisted in the front of his robes to pull him the final fraction down. And the great clock in the tower gave the deep preliminary shudder that came always a full minute before it struck. The low grinding wind-up of its ancient mechanism rolling out over the whole waking castle. The sound that meant the dawn bell, the bell that would break the binding, was about to ring. They froze at the sound, not apart. His hands stayed at her jaw, hers stayed fisted in his robes, their mouths a breath from meeting. But the grinding wind-up of the great clock rolled through the castle and through them both, and Hermione felt Draco go rigid against her, and she understood, in the same instant he did, exactly what the sound meant. 1 minute. The mechanism took 1 full minute between its warning shudder and the first true toll. And the first true toll of dawn would break the binding. The tether behind her sternum, the thread that had drawn them together all night against their wills, would simply cease. The magic that had forced this, the drawing, the dance, the shrinking leash, the sealed doors, the whole apparatus of compulsion that had walled them into each other's company until neither could pretend the other away, would let them go. And then it would be only choice. She felt the terror of that arrive in him. She felt it in the sudden stillness of his hands, in the breath that caught and held in his chest against her knuckles, and she understood the shape of it because it was the shape of her own. All night the magic had been the excuse. We're bound, we can't help it, the tether decided. Every true thing he'd confessed, every mask he'd let her take, every inch he'd stopped defending, all of it had happened inside the safety of we have no choice. But in 1 minute, the choice would come back. In 1 minute, the thread would break, and they would be 2 free people standing in a passage, and everything they did after the bell they would be doing because they had decided to, with no enchantment left to blame, no compulsion to hide the wanting behind. Hermione! Her name came out of him strangled. His hands had begun minutely to loosen at her jaw. When it breaks, when the tether goes, you'll be free of me. You won't have to. The magic's kept you here. It's kept us both here. And once it's gone, you can walk back to the hall and to your friends, and to the person you were before some fire threw our names together. And no one will blame you. No one will even remember by Tuesday. It'll just be the strange night the lottery misfired, and nothing came of it. There he is, she said. He stopped. There's the coward dressed as a saint, right on schedule. Her voice was fierce and low and shaking, but not with fear, with the effort of holding him, of not letting the 60 seconds take him back behind the last wall he had left. You did it in the linen closet. and you're doing it again now, handing me an exit. You can walk away. No one will blame you. Nothing came of it. You're not offering me freedom, Draco. You're offering yourself an escape route. You count exits too. I've been watching you do it all night. You've had one hand on a way out of every true thing you've said, and this is the biggest exit you've built yet, and it's got my name on it so you can pretend it's a kindness. The clock ground on above them, the seconds bleeding away. You think when the bell rings, I'll be free of you. What you mean is that when the bell rings, you'll be free of having to find out whether I'd have chosen you without the magic making me. And you'd rather not find out. You'd rather hand me the door first, so that if I take it, it was my idea, and you never have to stand in the room and hear me say the word. His face had gone white. His hands were still at her jaw, not gripping now, not loosening either, arrested, and she saw in the grey of his eyes that she had reached the last true thing, the thing beneath all the other things, the fear under the guilt, under the pride, that he could not bear to be chosen freely, because if he was chosen freely, then he had to believe it. And believing it meant setting down the certainty of his own worthlessness that he had carried so long it had become the shape of his hands. So, here is what we're going to do, she said, and she brought her own hands up and covered his where they framed her face, holding them in place, not letting him take them back. We're going to stand right here. We're not going to move. The bell is going to ring, and the tether is going to break. And in the moment it breaks, the exact moment, Draco, when the magic lets go, and there is nothing on this earth holding me to you but my own 2 feet and my own free will. I am going to still be standing here, with my hands over your hands, choosing you. Not because a fire drew our names, not because a leash shortened, because I want to. And you are going to be standing here finding out once and for all whether you can survive being wanted by someone who isn't compelled to want you. That's the test. That's the only test that was ever going to matter. And I've already decided how I'm answering it. The only question left in this passage is you. The clock ground toward its striking. 30 seconds, perhaps. Less. Above them, the whole castle waited, the great mechanism turning over its ancient gears, and the distant music had faded, and even the crowd in the hall had hushed the way crowds hush before a bell, and there was nothing in all the waking world but the 2 of them, and the 60 seconds running out, and his hands trembling under hers against her face. "I'm frightened," he said. It came out of him small and true, and without a single ornament. No drawl, no sneer, no melodrama, no exit. Just the plain fact of it, handed to her bare. I've never been chosen for anything in my life that I didn't buy or inherit or take. I don't know how to be wanted for nothing, for no reason, for only myself. It's the one thing I was never taught, Hermione. There was a fork for everything but that. I know. Her thumbs moved over the backs of his hands. Her voice gentled, all the fierceness melting into something warm and steady and sure. I know you're frightened. So am I. I count exits, remember. I've spent 2 years unable to sit with my back to a door, and I'm about to sit with my back to the biggest door there is, and let the magic that's been my excuse walk out of it. We're both terrified. That's all right. We can be terrified together. That's the whole of what I'm offering, Draco. Not certainty, not a promise that it won't cost us, not a world that will be kind about it. Just two frightened people who never learn to stay, staying anyway, choosing it anyway, standing in the room with no exit anyway, together, because the alternative is going back to counting doors alone for the rest of our lives. And I have done alone, and I am so tired of it, and I would rather be frightened with you than safe without you. The great clock gave its final grinding heave. She felt the tether then, the thread behind her sternum that had drawn taut and slack and taut again all night, the compulsion that had bound them, the magic that had forced every true thing into the open. She felt it gather itself for its ending, felt it thin, felt it begin, in the last held second before the bell, to fray toward nothing. And in that fraying second, with the enchantment dying and the choice rushing back and his hands trembling under hers and his frightened, undefended eyes fixed on hers as though she were the only fixed point in a turning world, she saw him decide. She saw the fear stay. It did not leave him. It was never going to leave him. Not tonight. Perhaps not for a long while. But she watched him decide to stand inside it anyway. She watched Draco Malfoy, who had spent 7 years and 1 long night building exits out of everything, choose, finally, to stand in a room without one. His hands steadied under hers. His forehead came down to rest against hers. His eyes closed, and his mouth, when he spoke, was so close to hers that she felt the words form against her own lips. "Then let it break," he said. "Let the whole thing break. I don't want the magic. I never wanted the magic. I want to still be standing here when there's nothing left holding me but wanting to be. Ring the bell, Hermione. I'm not going anywhere. Let it—" And the dawn bell struck. The first toll rolled out over the castle, deep and golden and enormous. The sound of the year turned and the longest dark ended, and the light coming back. And in the sternum of every bound pair across the sleepless castle, the tethers broke at once, the magic releasing its held breath, the compulsion ending, the leashes falling away into nothing. And Hermione felt the thread that had joined her to Draco Malfoy all night simply cease to exist, felt the enchantment let her go, felt herself become, in one ringing instant, entirely and completely free to walk away. And she did not move an inch. Her hands stayed over his. Her forehead stayed against his brow. Her feet stayed rooted to the flagstones of the passage in the grey first light. And she stood there, choosing him with nothing left to make her. Nothing at all, only her own free will and her own tired, brave heart. And she felt him understand it, felt him feel the tether break and feel her stay. And she felt the last of the fear go out of his hands as the second toll of the bell began to ring, and his mouth found hers at last. He kissed her, and the bell tolled on above them, and the whole night came to rest in it. It was not the kiss she might have imagined, in the rare unguarded moments over the years when she had let herself imagine anything about Draco Malfoy at all. It was not fierce, not triumphant, not the hungry crush of two people finally seizing what they'd been denied. It was slow. It was careful. It was the kiss of a man who had never been permitted anything for nothing, and could not quite believe he was permitted this, and so approached it the way one approaches a thing one is terrified of breaking. His mouth soft against hers, tentative, asking, his hands still cradling her jaw as though her face were the most fragile and most precious object he had ever been trusted to hold. She felt the tremor in his lips. She felt him hardly daring to press, waiting, even now, for the world to snatch it away, for the enchantment to prove to have been the whole of it, for her to remember herself and step back into the person she'd been before the fire wrote their names. So she answered him. She curled her fingers into the front of his robes and drew him down and kissed him back with all the plain, fierce certainty she had. And she felt the moment the answer reached him, felt the exact instant the disbelief broke and the truth of it landed, that she was staying, that the tether was gone, and she was staying, that there was nothing on earth holding her to him now but the wanting to be. A sound came out of him against her mouth, low and wrecked and wholly undefended, and his careful control dissolved all at once, and his arms came around her and gathered her in, and the tentative asking became something deeper and surer. Two people who had spent 7 years and one long night learning how to reach each other finally, fully reaching. The dawn bell rang out its full count over the waking castle. Grey light strengthened at the tall windows of the passage. Beyond the glass, the frozen snow had come unstuck and was falling again, softly, the ordinary snow of an ordinary morning, drifting down into the courtyard where the founders stood white-shouldered in the new light, and the longest dark of the year had turned at last toward the coming of the sun. And in the dim passage between the warm hearth-room and the distant golden hall, Draco Malfoy held Hermione Granger as though he had been drowning his whole life, and had only just been shown that the water would hold him, and she held him back, and neither of them was counting anything at all. When at last they drew apart, it was only far enough to breathe, foreheads together, his hands still framing her face, hers still fisted in his robes, both of them unsteady, both of them staring at the near impossible fact of the other. "The tether's gone," he said. His voice had gone rough and wondering. "I can feel that it's gone, and you're still here. I'm still here. You could walk back to the hall right now, and it would all just be the strange night the lottery misfired." He said it not as an offered exit this time, but as a marvel, testing the shape of a thing he could not quite believe. "You could, and you're not going to." "I'm not going to." She smiled up at him, tired and certain and unguarded, the first unguarded smile she had given anyone in longer than she could remember. "I told you. I already chose you in a courtroom 2 years ago. This is only the part where I get to do it out loud, in the light, with the magic gone and nothing to hide behind. This is the easy part, Draco. The hard part was 2 years of not letting myself know." Something moved through his face, relief and disbelief, and a happiness so raw it looked almost like grief. The way a man weeps when a thing he had given up on comes true after all. And he closed his eyes and pressed his lips to her forehead and held her there, and she felt him breathe, in and out, slow and steady, a person learning in real time that he was allowed to have arrived somewhere safe. "I don't know how to do this," he murmured against her hair. "Any of it. Being had, being kept, standing in the light where people can see and not flinching back behind a wall. I'm going to be terrible at it, Hermione. I'm going to build exits out of habit, and you're going to have to catch me doing it and drag me back into the room, probably for years, possibly forever. I want you to know what you're choosing. I'm not a reformed thing. I'm a frightened thing that's decided to try. That's all I can promise you. A frightened thing that's decided to try and won't stop trying, and will tell you the truth even when the truth is that I nearly ran. That's more than most people promise, she said. And it's more true than most people manage. I don't want a reformed thing, Draco. Reformed things are a lie. They're just people who've learned to hide the wanting to run better. I want the one who tells me when he nearly ran. I'll take the frightened thing that's decided to try. I'm one too. We'll be terrible at it together. She drew back enough to look at him properly, to hold his grey eyes with hers in the strengthening light. And I'll catch you building exits, and you'll catch me counting them, and between the two of us, maybe we'll learn to sit with our backs to a door. It's the only thing I've wanted in 2 years and never once said aloud. Somewhere to put my vigilance down. I think it might be you. I think you might be the room I don't have to watch. His breath caught. He looked at her as though she had handed him something he had not known it was possible to be given. Then I'll be the room, he said simply. For as long as you'll stand in it, I'll be the one place you don't have to count the exits, and Merlin help anyone who tries to make you feel unsafe in it, because I've had tea with terrible people, Granger, and I learned a few things at those teas, and I'd cheerfully unlearn every polite thing my mother drilled into me for the pleasure of ruining anyone who made you flinch. The old dry edge was back in his voice, but warmed all the way through, gentled past cruelty into something that was almost nearly tenderness wearing humour's coat. It's the one useful skill my upbringing gave me. I'm a monster with a pedigree. I might as well point it at something worth defending. She laughed, and it came out watery, and she pressed her face into his chest and felt his arms come around her and hold. And for a long moment they simply stood in the grey passage in the falling light and let themselves be held. Two people who had spent the whole of their lives braced for the next blow, learning the strange, unfamiliar shape of leaning against someone instead. And that was how Ginny found them, when she came back down the passage as she'd promised, before the last of the bell had faded, not locked in some fraught, ambiguous tangle to be rescued from, but standing quiet in the dawn light, Hermione's face against Draco's chest, and his cheek resting on the top of her head, and both of them unmistakably at rest. Ginny stopped at the mouth of the passage. She did not speak. She looked at the two of them for a long moment, and Hermione lifted her head and met her friend's eyes over Draco's arm, and whatever Ginny saw in her face made her own soften, made the readiness to fight go out of her shoulders, and something like wonder come into her instead. "Well," Ginny said at last quietly, "that's not the strange night the lottery misfired, is it?" "No," Hermione said, "it isn't." "You're sure?" It wasn't the old managing question anymore. The "are you all right? Should I get you out?" It was a friend asking a friend to be certain and honouring the answer in advance. "Because if you're sure, Hermione, then I'm going to go back in there and I'm going to tell the first person who says a word against it exactly where they can put it. And I'm going to keep doing that for as long as it takes, because that's what we do. But I have to know you're sure." "I'm sure, Gin." Hermione felt Draco go still beside her at the offer buried in it, at the fact of someone she loved lining up unasked, to stand between him and the world's opinion of him. And she felt him not know what to do with it. This boy who had been certain his name meant only rot. She reached back and found his hand and laced her fingers through his, cold leather and warm skin, and held it where Ginny could see. "I'm sure." Ginny nodded. She looked at Draco then, directly, for the first time. Not at the Malfoy heir, not at the boy who let them in, but at the person standing in the passage holding her best friend's hand in the dawn. And she held his gaze until he understood he was being seen, actually seen and weighed. And, against every expectation he'd carried into this castle, not found to be only one thing. "You hurt her," Ginny said, without heat, as plain as a fact of weather. "And there won't be enough of you left to bury. But you already knew that." "I can tell you already knew that, so we'll leave it there." And then, astonishingly, one corner of her mouth turned up. "Come to breakfast, the pair of you. The others are going to be insufferable, and you might as well get it over with while you're too happy to care. And Malfoy, for what it's worth, and I can't believe I'm saying it, you clean up all right for a ferret." She turned to go, and threw the last of it back over her shoulder as she went, bright and careless and kind. "Before the bell, you promised. You made it. Just about." And she was gone, back toward the light and the noise and the ordinary morning, leaving the passage to the two of them, and the falling snow, and the last fading resonance of the dawn bell in the old stones. Draco let out a long, unsteady breath. "She threatened to kill me," he said, "and invited me to breakfast in the same sentence." "That's Ginny." Hermione turned in the circle of his arms to face him fully and reached up and did the thing she had reached to do hours ago in a cold corridor before a wand light had frozen her hand an inch from his skin. She laid her palm against the side of his face, against the tired, honest line of his jaw, and this time nothing interrupted it. And she felt him lean into her hand the way a man leans into the first warmth after a long winter. "It means she's decided you're worth defending. She wouldn't threaten someone she'd already written off. It's a very Weasley form of welcome. You'll get used to it." "Will I?" He turned his face and pressed his lips to the center of her palm, his eyes closing, and when he opened them again they were clear and grey, and, for the first time in the whole of the long night, entirely unafraid. "I'd like to. Get used to it. All of it. The threatening breakfasts and the being seen and the standing in rooms without exits. I'd like to get used to all of it, Hermione, for a very long time, if you'll let me stay." "I'll let you stay," she said, "for a very long time, on one condition." "Name it. Take the ring off." She glanced down at the silver signet on his smallest finger, the cold thing that had bitten against her skin all night, the seal of a name and a family and an inheritance he'd told her he loathed. Not forever, not as some grand gesture, just for breakfast. Come to breakfast as a person and not as the Malfoy heir. Leave the pedigree in the passage for an hour and just be the one who hid in kitchens and liked the smell of bread. That's who I want at the table, not the seal, the boy under it. He looked at her for a long moment in the dawn light, and then, slowly, without a word, he worked the signet ring off his finger and closed it in his fist, and he crossed to the dark window where she'd set his mask hours before, and he laid the ring down beside it on the cold sill, the two symbols of everything he'd been ordered to be left together in the grey light of the turned year. And he came back to her with his bare hand open, the pale band of skin where the ring had lived exposed for the first time in years, and he laced that bare hand through hers. "Better?" he asked. "Better," she said. And Hermione Granger led Draco Malfoy out of the passage and into the morning, toward the light and the noise and the insufferable friends and the whole uncertain, unwritten, freely chosen life waiting on the other side of the dawn bell. And neither of them, walking hand in bare hand into the strengthening sun, counted a single exit on the way.
Thank you for staying until the end. I want to tell you why I wrote this story. When I started, I did not want to write about magic. I want to write about fear. The fear of letting someone see the real you. Both of them wear masks in this story. Draco wears a real one, but he also wears another one, his pride, his cold words. And Hermione was her own mask too. She counts the exits in every room. She never feels safe. My favorite part is small. It is when Draco tells her about the kitchen, the warm room that smelled of bread. He was a little boy hiding there. That is the moment he stopped being a villain and became a person. While I was writing, I kept thinking about one simple thing. It is easy to hate people when they are only a story to us. It is hard to hate them when we see the fire-tended child inside it. The magic in this story forced them to stay close, but the magic breaks it down, and here is the whole point. When nothing is forcing them anymore, she still stays. He still stays. That is love, not the thing you are forced to feel, the thing you choose when you are finally free to walk away. So this is the moral, if there is one. We all count the exits, we all build walls, but maybe the bravest thing is to stand in a room with no exit, next to someone who makes you feel safe. Thank you for listening. Take care of your heart.